A warm welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to be chatting about modernized infrastructure. I'm now going to hand over to Daniel Rovers, our host and moderator for today's session.
Thanks very much, Kerry, and thank you to the HPE team for allowing us to have two guests with us from offshore. It's really nice to get funny accents and hear about different places and new castles. I'm going to introduce you to Tony and Matthew in one moment. In preparation for today's session, we were talking about the unsung heroes of industry, and today we're going to dive into pertinent areas that touches not only the CIO, the CFO, but really getting down to the architects and how the world has changed from their perspective. Just on interest's sake, I Googled the top 10 paying salaries in 2021, and 5, 6, and 7 all come in today. Applications architect, data architect, DBA, let's skip over there, and network and cloud architect coming in at number 10. Now that's talking to me about the importance of having the right person around. And the simple fact is that we've got about 44 zettabytes of data in the world today. And that's expected to grow to 463 exabytes of data by 2025. We're spending about $1 million per minute on commodities on the internet. And electronic arts, which is a real thing, is creating roughly 50 terabytes of data every day. We're on the verge of 75 billion IoT devices around the world. And by 2030, a little bit depressing, 9 out of every 10 people from the age of 6 and above will be digitally active. So the world is changing rapidly, and all of this data has to be stored somewhere, and our companies are having to deal with this on an ongoing basis. It's not the same as it was yesterday. Today, we are joined by Tony. As I said, Tony has got about 30 years of experience in IT. He's the chief technologist from an HPE perspective, and he's well positioned to guide our discussion today. Tony, you don't look as old as your experience.
I think you're just being generous there, Dan. I think I know I must be old because I've had my COVID vaccination at this point. I had it yesterday, so that ages
Tony,
me.
I had mine before yours.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
No.
No, you made me feel old.
And we'll see why Matt got his before yours, because Matt is in BDM, so he's from a sales perspective and used to getting in the shortcut to get to the root of the issue from a storage and a data perspective. Both of you are in England. Tony, we've got to ask the question, what football team do you think Matt supports? And Matt, what rugby team do you think Tony supports?
Sheffield you come from, Matt, don't you? So United or Wednesday then?
That was always going to be a trick question, Tony, but I'll go with what the family go with, which is United.
There you go, Blades. Yeah.
I'm going to completely struggle with you, so I'm just going to say West Ham.
On a rugby, mine was rugby though.
Yes, that was the thing. It was a trick question for you, just to change up, see if Matthew was checked in. Guys, the world of COVID is relaxing in the UK a little bit. You are allowed out and about. Tony, how has the last 18 months been from a perspective of meeting with customers? And are you having face-to-faces today, or are you all zoomed out?
Yeah, I am pretty much all zoomed out, but we are still working on Zoom over here. Yeah, I literally haven't seen a customer you getting on for 18 months, as you said, Dan. It's when I say physically met, we have Zoomed, we have Teams, we have Skyped, we have done everything. We had an executive briefing center, which has now become a virtual executive briefing center, where we've coordinated things that way. But no, it's been pretty much my screen in front of me is my interaction with customers at this moment in time.
Matthew, from a perspective of BDM, we're talking about meeting new people and uncovering new needs and getting into the sales cycle. Have you learned any lessons during this 18 months of things that you would change when it comes to uncovering leads, getting maturing leads and closing deals? Is there anything you want to share on that?
I think it's a nightmare. I think if you look at this exact event that we're doing now, we would have done this face to face. Me and Tony would have really enjoyed a nice trip to South Africa, enjoyed the sunshine, gone to Golden City. But yeah, the entire go-to-market's changed, and we're having to innovate. We're having to mix things up and do things that we've never done before. So I think from a sales cycle and funnel perspective, there's plenty of opportunity out there. People know that they need to do stuff, but the way that we interact and the way that we engage with customers has been completely changed forever. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. I think the global pandemic has irrevocably changed the way sales works. Everyone can deliver remotely, but selling and eyeballing people, how do you meet new people when you can't do it? The only way is like this. Tony, what do you think, in a summary, is enterprise big business challenges that they're dealing with, that they're grappling from a high-level perspective? Where do you think the stumbling blocks are?
I think we've just, at a high level, talked about a couple of those. It's that change. It's how do I change my business process to accommodate these new ways of working? From our perspective, as Matt said, just as HPE is a business, our whole sales process, our whole delivery process, our whole product supply chain has had to change to accommodate the differences that this pandemic has brought about. And really, that agility, we spoke a lot, I think, before the pandemic about agility and business agility and how quickly can we react. But it's only in these past 18 months we've really learned what agility is all about. And really how IT supports that agility and how we've been able to adapt and accommodate. We were just talking about that flip to Zoom and Teams meetings and everything else like that. There's a lot of digital stuff that has gone on in the background to enable that, and in a lot of cases virtually seamlessly. You think about some of those projects and how long, we would have discussed those projects and we would have taken years to roll the things out and put kit on the floor and tested it. And ultimately, we then had to adapt so fast that we've delivered projects, business transformation projects, in literally weeks, which might have taken years in the past.
You look at that transformation that Tony talked about. I think if you bend something, it will eventually break. And I think we've done that, and we've transitioned services, but we've not necessarily done the due diligence in terms of total cost of ownership, return on investment. And we've done things to make the business keep ticking. And I think that's a real crucial part around what I'm talking to customers around is actually, it's great that we've done this innovation, but let's actually now look at the commercial side of that, make sure that it was the right move and how we can tweak it. So I think this forced digital transformation that we've had over the past 18 months is great from my perspective because you can see progress, but I think it's about resetting that clock and reanalyzing what you've done.
So Matt, is there a voice of caution there? You don't think we've seen the full consequences yet?
I don't think so. I mean, even personally, the amount of as a service things that I've subscribed to, whether it's watching TV or Amazon deliveries, I know that I'm definitely spending more on things that help me at home. So you translate that against business and the amount of impact moving to these new innovative ways of delivering services. I think that cost analysis is always going to be an afterthought. And it's usually 2 days before payday that I have that.
Panic sets in. So if we take my rose-tinted glasses and we look at the successful businesses, how do you think they've evolved and adapted in the last 18 months, Matthew? We'll start with you because you're the cynic at the table, and then we'll move
Do I
to
come across
Tony.
cynical?
No, not at all. Not at all.
I think the successful businesses have done exactly what we just talked about. We're talking about that agility. We're talking about that least resistance to change. And I think...
Yeah, but pause there. If you strip off the sales varnish, what do you think they've done differently? And agility isn't... Do you have a one that comes to mind and you think how they've changed their service level or they've changed their interaction with us? And do you think where does it stem from? Is it from people like us? Is it from the leadership, or is it from the groundswell of the employees who said, like, we got to do things differently?
I think a lot of businesses were forced to help their employees work from home. If you actually look at the digital transformation that's happened, it's been internalized from businesses. So if I look at HPE, we did the switch to virtual meetings quite rapidly, but we didn't focus on the customer. And I think we spent the past year trying to understand the best ways to interact with customers. So I think the businesses that I've seen do real well are the ones that have thrived in terms of focusing more on the customer rather than helping their employees work from home. But yeah, hopefully that's a roundabout way of answering that.
So what I wrote down here is location change does not equal digital transformation.
Correct.
And I think that some people think because they've got this work from anywhere now down pat, they've digitally transformed. Tony, that's not digital transformation in your mind.
No, I think it's, and Matt mentioned it earlier from a cost perspective, but I think it's a risk perspective as well. It's digital patching almost. And don't let me knock that. I think what people have achieved is incredible in a short period of time. But we've done, rather than thinking strategically, I belittled the effort and the work that goes into the planning. And, we sit there and said, oh, these projects take years to roll out. I'm not saying that they always need years, but actually there is a set of processes and things that go through, like testing, interoperability, all these kind of things that we do that we have, if you like, skimmed over the top of. And I think there's the potential that there is this pot of risk that still sits there. We've bolted new systems onto old systems, and there's that technology debt, as it's being referred to nowadays, that still sat there. We didn't deal with that stuff in the first place, and we've maybe gone and put some services in the public cloud, but then linked back to some of those old systems. And how are we going to sustain and support that over a period of time? And I think that, not just from a cost perspective, but from how we view these things from a risk perspective, at some point, hopefully we'll get the chance to take a breath and go, do you know what? Pat on the back, we've done a fantastic job. We've supported our organizations through this time, but we now need to just take a breather and work out what it is that we've done. And is that sustainable long term? Or actually, do we now need to, if you like, transform the digital patching that we did in order to make sure that this stuff is sustainable, not just for today, not just to get us through the next 12 months, but to actually act as a platform that we can then take the next step from over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years, that kind of thing. And that's the danger to me, is that we kind of go, relief, it's all over, it's done. We don't go back and reflect on the way that we did things, and we look at that risk that is now embedded within those environments.
I really like that summation. And I think that, Matt, I love the way you're circling back to the consequences of these decisions that have been taken quite quickly. I was going to be asking you, do you think an example of how it's been done badly is good? But we'll come back to that, or not badly, just less successful. What do you think, Matt, are the biggest technological challenges that are being faced by businesses who are on this juggernaut kind of transform or we die program that are moving forward? What do you think their biggest technological stumbling blocks are?
I don't necessarily think it's a technical challenge. I think the biggest thing that the pandemic's taught us is to assess what you're doing today. And I think a lot of challenges that you see within IT, within organizations, is they're so busy. It's such a corny and cheesy phrase. They're so busy keeping the lights on, they forget to actually look at the wider picture. And that's not through any failing. That's just, I spent 16 years in IT doing the IT support thing, and I was always reactive. That's where I started my career, fixing things. But then I started to analyze what I was doing. How can we increase agility? How do you do that? Actually, just looking at what you're doing today is a great way of actually predicting where you're going to be in 6 months, 18 months time. And it can be challenging, and finding the tools to assess that situation are quite hard. But I think for me, it is that piece in terms of analysis of what you're currently doing is the biggest challenge. Once you've done that, you can overcome anything, whether that's technical, commercial, or actually proving return on investment on what you're doing. But I think from a digital transformation, the biggest opportunity for customers, businesses, is just making sure that you analyze what you're doing today. Hopefully that answers it.
Yeah, I think it does. Tony, if you had to go to these big enterprises and ask the same question, what do you think their business challenges are today? And you asked the CFO, the CIO, the data center manager, and the architect, Do you think they'd be on the same page, or do you think we're looking through very many different lenses?
I would love to say that we all look through the same lens, but I don't think we do. I mean, I was reflecting back on what you were saying about that data growth that we're seeing, and you were talking about zettabytes to exabytes and yada, 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 and this stuff. And it was there, one of the focuses that we've had, as we've changed is how do people access that data? How do people, if they're suddenly not close to it, how do they access it? And we're starting to understand that actually data within organizations is all in silos. And you get a CIO who goes, oh, I want a single customer view, or I want a single patient view if it's in healthcare or whatever. And they want this, and the infrastructure and the way that we architected things underneath that was never that way. We were application specific, and different applications, and the data resided within those applications. So you get this top level holistic view, which is quite simplistic of, give me an all round view of my customer, but actually the siloing that you mentioned of the data that sits underneath it, that's the challenge for us in delivering on some of those business requests that we get. It's similar to the CFO. I want a view of how my whole supply chain works, or the finances that do. Of course they do. That would make their jobs that much easier. But actually the challenge we have is providing that, where we've got data that sits in different parts of infrastructure. You bring cloud into this and public cloud services, and we're now moving data into more disparate places. And somehow we need to get a single view across that whole piece. And, as I always say, we spoke about data, but data is just data until you can drive some intelligence from it. And it's how do I get that, my hands or my digital hands around my data so that I can understand it and then start to extract value from it. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. That's one of the hidden challenges that almost, some of the stuff I was talking about earlier with the COVID and the way that we've rapidly has actually increased that challenge rather than reducing that challenge as we go forward.
Tony, I read this stat the other day. In the next 2 years, we're going to produce as much data as we have for the entire time of creating data. So if you look at that challenge, there's so much data. How do you move that around?
We are so good at creating data now. We are exactly as that stat, but actually getting intelligence from that data, that's the challenge. Yeah, data, fantastic. We can create as much as we want, but how do I create business intelligence from it? That's the challenge. That's where we need to do the work.
We've got a couple of questions coming in. I'd just like to highlight Kirtan Sita, an old friend of mine and an IT guru in his own right, has asked a question which I had written down, so I'm feeling pretty good. And I couched it slightly different from Kirtan, so I'm going to say it in Kirtan's way. Is your view, Matt, that corporates are still playing it safe in light of the digital sea of change? His is a lot more eloquent than mine, but over the last 18 months, the winners and the losers, do you think the losers are playing it safe and the winners have changed the game?
I think I'm going to play it safe in my answer. I think...
Coward! Go.
I think there very much is, other than changing things to more of a virtual world, what other digital transformation has actually happened for these businesses? And this is where Tony's quite interested in terms of looking at driving intelligence from the data. I think for me, we talk about digital transformation and we think, oh, now we're doing Zoom meetings, we're all cool, a box ticked. I do think there's still a massive leap forward. You look at some of the big intelligent companies that are the most interesting. I look at all the debate around TikTok and probably the intelligence that they're driving from recorded videos and analysis of those videos, being able to spot dogs. I know as daft as that sounds, it probably seems really mundane, but once you see those patterns, you then get even more cool stuff. And I think, yes, there is an air of caution.
Just pause there. Are you seeing that managers are equipped to make the right decisions with this data today? So if we've got these architects that are giving us access to the right data, that we're looking at it, are we getting it in context to make decisions today? And are we able to architect around that yet dynamically?
So I can only comment because I think I only saw this on a UK stat, is if you look at the skills gap in terms of what we're going to need in the next 5 to 10 years, I remember when I was at school, they weren't teaching me how to do some of the more interesting jobs that are around today. I mean, if someone turned to me and said that you could have a job doing social media management when I was 16, I would have laughed. But I think there's definitely, managers don't have the developers, in my opinion, to do some of this cool stuff. And I think there is that skills gap there. So you can have the data, but you need the intelligence to manipulate and take advantage of that data. And I think that's a gap.
I just want to pick up on something you were saying, which I think adds to the answer, Dan. If it doesn't add to the answer, cut me off fairly quickly. But I have this term that I'm kind of using, digital intelligence. And I think one of the problems that you have within the business is they don't have a lot of what I term digital intelligence. They've always done things that way, and they look at digital as doing things quicker. Oh, I have an analog process. How do I use digital to make me do that quicker? They don't necessarily look at it as how can I innovate with this? And I think this is where the architects and IT can actually help by understanding the business process or what it is that they're looking to do, and actually provide some innovation back into the business that goes, well, do you know what? If you had this, we could also put this on top of it, or we could take this data with this data, and that would give you a completely different view. And the business often will turn around and go, oh, I had no idea we could do that. I had no idea they were. And they don't have any, they don't have the art of the possible. And it's digital intelligence. And it's about working out where your digital intelligence sits within an organization. Too often IT will just sit there and go, well, I was asked to architect this, so I've architected it. We don't go back and question, what is it that you're using that for? How are you using it? Is there other things we could do? And I think that link between the architects and the business process is going to, that's where there's a real opportunity to push up higher and gain that understanding. Don't just sit and take it, just architect to what you've been told. Really question, what's the reason? Why are we doing this? What's the business case for putting this in? What's it going to change from a business process perspective? Because maybe there's other ways of doing it that they hadn't thought about because they didn't have the digital intelligence to do it. And by the way, digital intelligence is more about experience, rather than sitting down and being something that you read. You learn it because, like us, we got beards like Matt and myself and have been around the game. It's not necessarily a learned skill, it's an experience thing.
So, Tony, if I can carry on from that perspective, haven't we sorted that with a cloud-first strategy now? Because everything's cloud first. We're going to architect, we're cloud first. We're going to put in we cloud first. Everything's cloud first. Isn't that sort?
18 months ago, I had every person I went to, every customer I spoke to said, oh, we're cloud first now. We're going cloud first. Absolutely. There has to be some damn good reason why it's not, but we're going cloud first. And by that, a lot of the time they were meaning public cloud. But actually, there's a difference between public cloud and actually the attributes of cloud. But maybe we'll come on to that. But they were saying that. Now, I go, and most common conversation is, where are you on your cloud journey? Oh, we're about 70% traditional, 30% in the cloud, and we want to get that to a mix of 30-70. So this whole thing has said that there's a balance in the way that you do things. You can't just lift and shift everything the way that it was and just put it into a cloud format. Yeah, you can develop in the cloud, you're going to do that kind of stuff, but you still have that legacy stuff that you have to deal with. And just, a lot of it won't convert. A lot of it just needs to sit there, needs to be dealt with. You need to have compute close to data, to the users, for all sorts of reasons. And by the way, it's not just technology reasons. It can be data and compliance reasons and things along those lines that you want to know where you're hosting that stuff. I think the important bit is, how do I get those cloud-like attributes of agility, of on-demand, of flexibility, scale up, scale down? How do you get those attributes to that traditional stuff that you're experiencing with the cloud? I mean, everyone loves the cloud because you can just sit there and go, do you know what? I want a new server. I want some storage. Bang, it's there. How do I get that kind of feel to stuff, the traditional stuff that sits in the data center? Because if you can get that same look and feel to everything, then you don't really care where it is. You just care about those attributes that you want. You want the scale, you want it on demand, because it's that gives the agility that we were talking about earlier. Does that make sense, Dan?
Complete. So if we accept that we have now got workers all over the world, we've got applications in a hybrid environment, on-prem, we've got near data centers, we've got public data centers, we've got PaaS and SaaS, it's part of our world. Megan asks, how do we ensure our remote employees comply with our data retention policy?
I think that's a perfect one for us to probably catch up with you directly. I don't think there's one size fits all answer for that. But yeah, there's several directions you can go, whether that's backup and disaster recovery or some remote working apps. But yeah, it's definitely one for offline, I'd say.
And Dan, I think it is a great question. Yeah, a lot of it does come down to policy and the way that you implement policy. Megan has just highlighted one of those bits that said, do you know what? We've done a fantastic job of deploying and coping with this situation. But actually, by doing that, I've introduced other potential risks within that environment and given everyone access, whereas I had everything nicely contained within an office. And now I've given people access so that they can go and sit on the summer holiday whenever we're allowed on summer holidays again, or whatever, somewhere far in the world. What's to stop them just copying that data or taking a copy of it, doing whatever? And we've introduced new complexities. And now's the time that we've got to start thinking about those complexities and those things that we've introduced, because the cat's out the bag. People aren't going to sit there and suddenly go, well, I can only work from my office nowadays. So we've introduced a new set of challenges that we have to do. But a lot of these will be specific to a specific organization and the rules and the compliance that they have to conform to.
Ask these questions unless we've got a bit of time, but Anonymous has asked me a good question. We've noted remote workers finding it difficult to get caught up on a company's constantly evolving technological landscape. This has raised an issue about who is responsible for rollout and training employees on changes to procedure and infrastructure. And how would you suggest we handle this? So it's a long-winded question, but we're making changes to the environment. There are people that are affected by it. Where does that responsibility sit? How have you seen companies doing it really well from a rollout perspective, Tony?
It is a good question. And, again, I think the core of it comes to a little bit of we fundamentally changed the way that we do things within IT. I mean, I only have to go through my own Teams experience or my Zoom experience that I've had over the past 18 months and look how much that application has changed over that period of time. People might not remember, but within Teams, when we started out, you couldn't have the video and the pictures and the gallery all on the same screen at the same time. And Microsoft have rolled out those changes. Now, each time those changes have happened, I've had to sit there and go, what's happening here? Why isn't this doing what it's doing? And I think there is this, we're changing the way that IT in particular is deployed. And we're doing small incremental changes, which is actually more consumable by the user than where we used to take this. Do you know what? I'm going to have a new release once every 6 months or once a year. And then I can put in a whole training program around that. And we can take through the users. And when you log on, this is going to be your new experience. And this is, so we're moving, as we change the application development environment to microservices and all those kind of things, we are changing the way that we roll out and deploy it. Now, that doesn't necessarily say that that fixes the problem. We need to look at the way that when we do educate people, when we do make those changes, that we keep the training material up to date. And more, I see the use of YouTube videos, help links and things like that, linking through to small little user pieces. Oh, new feature. Here you go. Here's a 30-second, here's a minute video on how to use that new feature. So, yeah, absolutely. I think we have to change the way that we think about deploying these things and the way that we introduce those things.
And Matthew, your opinion? Does this sit with the vendor?
I've got a little bit of a story, to be honest. So,
okay.
I started my career.
I'll ask the question after this. Carry on.
It was really, I think IT needs to evolve. I remember being a 16-year-old apprentice working in a school, and this one teacher used to go to the other technician every day because the projector wouldn't work. One day he was off ill, and I just showed the teacher how to fix it. And funnily enough, she never came back. And that it's not IT's responsibility to train and enable in the traditional sense, but I mean, it's all about empowerment, and empowering your end users is only a good thing.
Yeah. So from this change that we've just heard Tony talk around, where does it sit? Does it sit at the vendor? Does it sit at HPE? Does it sit at the partner? Does it sit at the customer? whose responsibility is it? And actually what I'm asking you, what is your role in this? What does HPE do when a customer's got these great ambitions to go out and they're saying, we've got this cloud first strategy, and now we've told them actually just have a strategy. They've got a strategy, they've got expansion, they want to be agile. Where does HPE come in and assist them here? And then where do we go from a perspective of taking them to the next level?
So Dan, let me give that a go first of all, because I think it reflects very much in the way that HPE as an organization has realized we have to change. So, if you think of the HPE 5 years ago when we were Hewlett Packard, we were servers and storage. And that's what we did. And we shipped out servers and storage. We were world renowned, best in the world. We had to adapt. So instead of thinking ourselves as being the world leaders for servers and storage, we have to think ourselves as, how do we help people on digital transformation? What are the things that we need to do? So people are going to have cloud. They are going to have public cloud. So how do we build out a skill set that supports people, not just to implement the latest server or the latest storage array, but how do we help them make that part of their digital transformation? What are the services that the customer wants to deliver, and how high up do we need to go in order to be able to support that? In a lot of cases we talk about now, is actually they just want infrastructure as a service. They don't want to care about the bits that sit behind it. Now, obviously, there's a relationship that we need to have. They just want to consume this stuff as they go along. They want it there, but they don't want to worry about the patching. They don't want to worry about this, that, and the other. They want us to do that and take responsibility of that so they can get on with delivering the services. So, if you look at how HPE has evolved, I think we are moving up. We're no longer just about storage and compute. It's about how do we start to deliver those things as a service so that IT can then get on with supporting the business. So it's trying to move, take away that mundane, take away the boring stuff, the interoperability checking, the patch level checking, the tickets that just get raised that can be closed down, but someone needs to do something. How do we use AI, all these tools that we've got? So it's really pushing ourselves up that support stack so that the IT of the organization can get on and get closer to the business, because that's what we were talking about earlier on. Push that digital intelligence up into the organization. Does that make sense, Dan? I'll try and turn my notifications off.
Matthew, do you want to add in anything here, or can I ask you another curveball?
Entirely up to you. I can add, but if you want to throw in a curveball, I don't mind.
I'm just thinking that most of our organizations have complex IT infrastructures right now, and they've got information stored in multiple locations. We've got multiple applications doing different things. We are working in different locations. We've got silos of data that needs to be stored. How do we store data once and use it multiple times? How do we simplify this environment without sacrificing agility and performance? Is it a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or is it actually achievable for architects to do this?
So the data is the pot of gold. So if you look at everything about your IT infrastructure, the servers you can put anywhere, the compute, the memory, the resources you can get anywhere. The only thing unique to your business is your data. So how do you mobilize that data? How do you make it easy to put where you might want it, where it might be the most cost effective? That's the secret sauce. So if we go to the last question, why should vendors step up? Vendors, I think, are now realizing that data is that secret sauce. And the more that you can make that agile for people to consume, the more tangible you become. And I look at all the innovation that HPE have announced over the past 18 months. I've been with the business 2.5 years. The past 18 months have been really quite exciting because we're now offering things as a service, easy to consume and all that sort of good stuff. So I think from vendor land, we've recognized the importance is the data, and that data mobility is the missing link. If you look at how complex networks are and pushing around data between different clouds, it's not an easy thing. And that's what we're innovating, and that's what our focus is. And I think that's the exciting thing at the moment. Hopefully in a roundabout way that answers the question.
Awesome. Tony?
Yeah, I've got a little complexity story. This used to be one of my hot topics But I had this thing about complexity, because I think we deal with way too much complexity in IT. And actually complexity is one of the things that shackles us down and stops and prevents the agility. But I had this little presentation that I did around Schrodinger's cat. And I don't know if you know about the Schrodinger's cat experiment, but it was a quantum physicist, Schrodinger, and he had a cat in a box with a random way of killing it. And according to quantum physics, the cat is either alive or dead. It can act in this superposition state. And my point was that as soon as you open the box, you can then ascertain whether the cat is alive or dead. And I used to use this to explain complexity. And I'll come to that in a second. But I said, look, this little anecdote will survive as long as we have no nuclear physicists in the room. And it was in Belgium I was doing this, and someone said, Fritz has just joined us from CERN. He is a nuclear physicist. And I was like, oh God, right, this analogy is going to fall flat at that point. But so I haven't used that analogy since that moment. But if we've got any nuclear physicists on, you can pick it apart to your heart's content. But really the point was that in that thing, complexity disappears when you can measure it. So you need to think about, as soon as you can measure it and understand, and this relates to a whole load of stuff that we buffer in IT, that technology debt I was talking about. As soon as you can measure it and understand it, then you can quantify it, then you can start to do something about it. So a lot of this is about what are the tools and things that you've got in place. And I look at ourselves, and you can look at HPE, and we have an amount of tools. We have a thing called Assessment Foundry, which literally goes and looks at infrastructures and goes, do you know what, you've got these old operating systems, you've got this infrastructure that's out of date, but it starts to peel back some of those areas that we deem as too complex. We've just made an investment in another organization called Cloud Physics, or we've just purchased a company called Cloud Physics, which does this measuring of complexity. Not all of it, not everything in one go, but as soon as you can start to remove some of that stuff at the infrastructure layer, that lets you shift up and start to deal with some of those more complex things. Copies of data is always going to be a challenge. One of the things that we should be guilty of as an IT industry is making it too easy to copy digital data. It was hard in the old days when everything was paper-based. And now we just have the ability to make multiple copies. So then you have to start talking about metadata and how you put data on top of data to describe it. But again, it's the complexity. Deal with the underlying complexity. If you can measure it, you remove it, then you can go on to deal with the layer above.
It's often the Achilles heel of these projects, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's where the data is being stored and what's being done with the data and how do we identify it. I usually end with this, but Tony, I'd like to ask you and Matthew 3 specific questions, because then we've got a little bit of time. There might be discussions from questions from our audience. Tony, I'm going to start with you, and then Matthew, exact same question, hopefully a different answer. What are you most excited about coming out of HPE in the next 6 months, which we may not have heard about from a technological perspective?
So I can do the first two very easily. Again, and maybe it's because my brain was just focused, but the use of artificial intelligence to untangle that complexity and the things that we're doing around artificial intelligence. We already have, a market brand out there around InfoSight, but I think you look at some of the developments that are going to be coming on that and how we're now not just looking at specific components of the infrastructure, but how we're linking that together to give a view of how artificial intelligence can just take away the mundane task. That's what AI is good at, just monitoring, looking, repeating the repetitive stuff that people don't like to do.
So we're talking about AI with robotics integrated to enable the process. Are you making it more mainstream and accessible?
Absolutely. How we start linking that, not just being something that monitors, but how is that something that links into those processes and simplifies those business processes around administration, around those kind of areas.
So do you have a sneaky launch that we don't know about coming in the next 6 months that our attendees might appreciate?
All I can say is we have Discover coming up. So that's in a couple of weeks' time. That HPE Discover generally tends to be the traditional time where we go and make some announcements. And I think the way that we're using AI and also the way that we're simplifying data center infrastructure to just look like another cloud, yeah, and the push to be, the terminology is the hyperscaler of the data center. That's what the analysts are starting to talk about. That's what they're looking at, and I think we have some innovative stuff coming out around those. Now, that was my two. I'll leave the third one to Matt because I've probably stolen most of the thunder by doing.
I'm quite fortunate. I can actually talk about something that we announced on May the 4th. So it's something called Data Services Cloud Console. So if you imagine a top-down view of your entire storage estate, so if you link that back to all the cool stuff and all the pie-in-the-sky thinking that Tony talks around in terms of AI and OPAC analytics and automation, if you think of a console that's looking at all that data and then can push out a new bit of storage, a new application. So it's actually taking all that intelligence that we're gathering with the product called InfoSight and actually using it intelligent for you to make your life easier. So if it notices that you're running out of technical term IOPS, it can then provision some new storage to deliver more out. So it's actually deriving value from your data to give you better performance, better operations.
I think also on that, Matt, it's the ability to describe a workload and just say, do you know what, I've got a database, it needs to be high performance, it needs to be highly available, and we will go and look through the console, we'll go and look across the infrastructure and say, oh, look, this is the best place to put it. But if you have some data location requirements, actually, you could consider putting it in these two other places. So if you imagine that was stuff that used to be done on spreadsheets, where do I have space here? Where do I have the host capability? Where do I have the performance? What are the other things that are running in that environment? How do I do that multi-tenancy piece? And we're going to take that away and just go, oh, look, you can put it here or you can put it here. Which one do you want? Press the button.
We're still giving that point to Matthew. That was great bringing that. I love the automation side. Matthew, your question, what is your focus for the next quarter? And what are you working on specifically from an HPE perspective?
So my focus, so I'm the hyperconverged infrastructure business development manager. So my focus is growing pipeline around our HCI portfolio. So very much what I like to do is forums like this, where we showcase the technology, where we help salespeople, where we help end customers, we do demos and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, I've got a very busy schedule with the enablement piece, but then also doing our own in-house analytics in terms of what the trends are. And there's some very good, cool IDC and Gartner stuff that I need to digest, which is going to be fun.
So for our attendees, if they wanted to get a POC or get a demo together, you are the right person in there. Your local team here can facilitate that. So if you're making architectural decisions, don't do anything until you've chatted to the HPE team and had a look at what they got. Your focus, Tony?
I've got two, actually. Dan, one briefly is we have an ongoing program which is around digital transformation and how we map digital transformations onto what we call a digital journey map. And the idea here is just so that we can create a common language for communication back into the business. So, a digital transformation generally tends to be lots of individual little projects, but how do those projects link together in order to deliver that, that end outcome that you want, which is a better customer experience when they come into the website. So we have a methodology in place, and I'm doing some work around that. The other piece was following on from a piece of work I did last year, which was around the cost of storing nothing, where we look at the way that people traditionally have bought storage in this case, but IT infrastructure. But from a storage perspective, you'd be amazed that people only ever use 60% of what they buy. And that's because technology changes over time, requirements change over time, but ultimately it changes over the life cycle. But on average, around about 60% of the capacity that is purchased is used, and around 30 to 40% is never used. It's never touched. And it's an interesting link between a technology cycle and the sales cycle. And you think if you could take that out, that's a 30% saving, 30, 40% saving, if you can work out how you can optimize the way that you do that. So we're looking at developing that work a little bit further and then taking that to service as well.
So I know this is the antithesis of what you would like to be asked, but Tony and Matt, for attendees who are not HPE customers and making these architectural decisions now, apart from phoning me to come and get work, that's a given. what would you advise them? What are the pitfalls that they make? And Megan actually asked it in the question. What are the common errors that companies make when they start their journey to cloud data storage? So what advice would you give them as starting this journey?
Don't think of these things as individual projects. Think about the outcome that you want to generate. And then don't just think of, oh, I need some new storage, or I need some new servers, or we need to upgrade this, or we need to do this. Those things are always done for a reason. They have links. We spoke a little bit about that. I think it was Megan again who said, we've enabled people to access data from a wider perimeter. How is that going to impact my data location policy, my security policy, and things like that? So think about how these things link together. Any small project that you do probably is going to have an impact on security or on trust, because if you're using somebody else's data, they've got to be comfortable that you're going to do that. There's an operating model. There's a sustainability kind of question. So always don't look at the things as individuals. Look at how those projects impact those things. And that enables you to build up this picture that helps you coordinate and prioritize, and again, removes complexity.
Awesome. Come on, Matt, your advice for someone that's starting this journey.
I think Tony summed it up really eloquently. I think the biggest thing for me is collaboration. I look at my IT support days. I didn't collaborate with the business. I just fixed things. As I started to progress through my career, I started to understand the business more. And once I understood the business more, I started to understand what drove my CFO. What drove my CFO is they really liked CapEx spending, and they had set budgets. Sorry, my dog was growling at me. And they had set budgets, and she was very averse to OpEx. So this as a service model wouldn't have really fit to her. But this CapEx model, where every 3 to 5 years I renewed infrastructure, and I knew that she had a number in her head that she wanted to give me, whether it's 50 grand, $1 million, whatever it was. But I'd always build in buffers, because I didn't want to be that guy that turned around to her and said, oh, yeah, we've just run out of space. Can we have some more money? So I think that collaboration piece is hugely advantageous, but that comes into analyzing where you are, understanding what the business drivers are, and actually linking those back to IT. So that collaboration piece, I think, is my key tip.
I like that. I think if we take the 3 answers or the 3 questions that you've asked, the common theme is that we can't look at the silo. I think I just vomited. We can't look at our own little islands of responsibility. It all impacts a program. And we need to, if we want to be effective in our architectural decisions, we need to understand what's pulling at all levels or all different responsibilities. So understand the financial impact, understand the customer impact, understand the organizational goals that are going through, and architect towards that, because these small activities are linking together in a program that's going over. And if we get that right, we can be pretty influential in the organization and the success thereof. This digital transformation doesn't seem to be going away. And if anything, from my perspective, it's now the digital, just like cloud strategy, the label is going away. It's transformation. It's a strategy that we're going on to, and we're battling to do more with less. We haven't even touched on that from a perspective. Tony, I'd like to get a really slick elevator pitch. How do you think companies can do more with less today? You've spoken about a 40% saving on storage already. Folks, that's awesome.
I'm not the slick elevator pitch guy. That's Matt. But it's look at the way that you buy. Yeah, look at the way that you buy. Only pay for what you consume.
Matthew, come on, give me a Tony answer around that. What do you think? How do companies do more with less?
Collaboration and understanding where you are technically and as a business. I think that's your best route to success, and only pay for what you consume is a good mentality. And I'm sure that you can get that from HPE.
Yeah. In the preparation for all our participants that were on there, we had a number of prep sessions around this, because data storage is not the sexiest topic. And I think what came through from Matthew, from Tony, and the HPE team is understanding that these are the storage cells of the organization. And There's so much innovation that's happening here. Just from my own perspective, the learning that I've done in the 2 sessions that we've done in preparation, my advice to anyone that's on the call is the technology is changing so much, so quickly. Attend sessions like this, but more importantly, reach out to the channel, reach out to your partner, and reach out to HPE and find out how they are changing. I run every day, every single day, and my running was stabilized. It was pretty okay. I got a new pair of shoes with carbon plates in, and I've had a 10% improvement. That doesn't sound significant, but when you're running a marathon of 3:01 or you want to do a 2:58, that 10% can be the difference. And I think that what you guys have given to us by giving us this discussion is just a view of where that plate could come through, where that 10% can come. And Tony, I know it was a throwaway comment, but where people are only using 60% of what they've paid for, that's 40% that could be used to train our engineers, that could be used for facilitating transformational projects, or it could be to use for giving people bonuses in this time where people are cutting back significantly. So I think that's the one piece of wisdom that I really have taken away is know what you've got and know what you're using from it. From my side, it was quite intimidating facilitating this session because I'm not a techie. Luckily, Tony and Matthew have a way of talking at my level. I don't know if that's up or down. And for our attendees, thank you for your questions. From myself, Daniel Rovis, as the facilitator from TechCentral, I'm handing straight back to Kerry, and I'm finishing my amazing cup of Ethiopian coffee.
So thanks, guys, for attending today. I really do hope that you found today's session insightful and that we answered some of your questions. Cheers from TechCentral, and we'll see you guys at the next one.